All right. Hello, everyone, and welcome to our webinar. My name is Danielle Kirkby. I am a customer success manager here at ServiceRocket, and I am based in Wilmington, North Carolina. Today, we are going to go beyond the migration and talk about consolidating your Atlassian licenses into a single cloud instance. Before we dive into the material, I want to share a little more information about us in case you are new to ServiceRocket. For over 20 years, ServiceRocket has been a leading provider of tech-enabled services, helping fast-growing companies in the acceleration of their growth. You can see here in this map, we have a global footprint and have offices and Rocketeers across the world. We are a Platinum Solution and Platinum Marketplace partner of Atlassian and can offer assistance with all of your needs. From software adoption to platform expansion, you have a partner in ServiceRocket. As mentioned, my name is Danielle, but leading us in today's webinar, we are joined by the amazing Taiwo Ekindele, who is a senior solution architect here at ServiceRocket and is based in our London office. Taiwo, would you like to take over and introduce yourself?
Sure, Danielle. Thank you. Hello, everyone. My name is Taiwo. I'm a technical consultant here at ServiceRocket, and it's my pleasure to be discussing with you on the topic of today's webinar. In today's topic from our Beyond Migration series, we're going to be looking at consolidating your Atlassian licenses into a single cloud instance. We're going to start by discussing common incentives or background for most consolidation projects, and the sort of value that Atlassian customers can derive from consolidating their instances. We will discuss the different strategies for successful consolidation of the Atlassian products. Specifically, we will focus on Jira and Confluence strategies. Then, of course, we will discuss the roles that a solution partner like ServiceRocket is able to play in helping customers navigate consolidation successfully. I would encourage you to drop a comment with any questions that come to mind during the presentation in the chat or Q&A box, and I believe Danielle would help to moderate those for discussion towards the end. So yeah, let's dive into it. So how in the first place do customers end up with multiple instances? Well, the most obvious of scenarios that might come to your mind would be acquisitions. So for example, company A has Jira and Confluence DC, and then they acquire company B or company B and C. And let's assume company B and C also have Jira or Confluence running either on server or cloud. But sometimes even without acquisitions, you could just have a large enterprise company where there's multiple teams, there's a development team, there's the IT team, there are different business teams. And at one point or the other, a team decided, hey, we're going to use Jira for, our project management, or for, to track software development, or, as a service desk. And individual teams have independently set up software, Jira software or Jira service management, whether in cloud or they've hosted it within the company infrastructure. And they could come to a point where the company as a whole says, hey, we want to standardize the use of Jira or Atlassian products across the board. And they might be looking to consolidate. Now, you may wonder, how is having multiple instances like this, fractured around the organization a problem? Well, it can be a problem in many ways, but just to name a few. When you end up with multiple instances of Atlassian products like that, if you're lucky, perhaps all the instances have a central user base, but if you're not, it can be worse than that, and we have multiple user bases. You could have user accounts duplicated across the user bases without any standardization. For example, someone, when he needs to log into this app, or an employee needs to log into this app, he logs in a different way, but then there's another Confluence instance somewhere on another site, and he has to log in a different way. It can be chaos, right? You could also, another problem that is common is that you could end up with duplicate or redundant projects and redundant or duplicated business processes or workflows. This also further breaks the user experience due to inconsistency in the way the processes run on the different instances, and just a lack of organization. Another main factor, of course, is cost. Licensing costs will be duplicated. Infrastructure costs will be duplicated. The cost of just administering these instances, whether they're self-hosted or in the cloud, all of these are costs that get duplicated in having multiple instances. Governance and control, enforcing policies, or whatever governance requirements across the multiple instances is just won't be very good. Poor governance. We just have suboptimal ways to enforce standards across the site. And obviously, it also creates obstacles to integration. You're not able to properly derive value from your Atlassian stack when you have the apps, scattered all over the place. So those are just some of the pitfalls you would have from having the instances scattered around. Next slide, please, Daniel. And so you find that you can actually merge instances from cloud, from server, from DC instances into one cloud instance and get a streamlined and consistent experience across diverse project use cases. And in the next slide, we'll see more reasons why you should consider consolidation when you find yourself in these scenarios. So one consolidated license for each product, rather than having multiple licenses for each Atlassian site, will more often than not provide you some savings on licensing. So that's one major factor, one major win for wanting to bring instances together. There's some other wins, of course, that you cannot estimate with a dollar amount. For example, the improved team collaboration, the improved governance or standardization that you could have across your projects, the way you run your projects, the way teams work, having everything in a consistent manner. It's hard to put a dollar amount on that, but that's a major win, why you might want to consider consolidation. Also, provisioning of access to users can be more consistent, streamlined on one platform with a single sign-on through whatever central IDP or identity provider that you have. Well, the primary takeaway is that consolidation is possible, and it's advantageous in most of the scenarios that we've talked about so far. Next slide, please, Daniel. So let's talk about the how. Let's look at Jira for a bit. In the traditional approach, so we'll talk about a few approaches that are relevant when we're talking about consolidating instances. The first we're going to talk about is a traditional approach. Now, this applies to Confluence as much as it does to Jira, actually. And so let's take, for example, we're looking at an organization that has an instance in cloud, and they have another instance in DC or in data center or server. And they're looking to consolidate these instances to one cloud site. In the traditional approach, one of the limitations is that historically there was no way to merge a cloud instance with a server instance or with another cloud instance there was even no way to move from cloud to cloud historically. And so what happens is that you have to bring everything to server, whether it's a server instance or a DC instance. We'll call that bridging DC in the illustration. You'd have a bridging DC where you move from cloud into temporarily, and then you do all the consolidation on the server or DC side before you then move the finally consolidated instance, you migrate that in full to cloud. So that's the traditional approach. Now, if you are familiar with the built-in project import in Jira, for example, if you're a Jira admin, for instance, and you've used the Jira project import built into Jira, you'd realize how painful that can be, right? You have to do a lot of things manually. You have to make sure that configuration in source and target match versions of plugins, field configurations, schemes. You have to make sure that things match. You have to deal with conflicts manually. It can be a pain, right? So this traditional approach has quite a bit of drawbacks. Next slide, please, Daniel. It does have some pros, though. All the products in the Jira family can be migrated with this approach, technically. Also, it does help to avoid a problem that we call migration drift, which we will talk about in a subsequent slide. So that could be some of the reasons why some people would use this approach. Of course, the cons are that it is lossy in the sense that because you have to move from cloud to server, and if you consider the fact that, for example, you don't have, you may have features that are available in cloud, not available in server. There's not a parity of features between server and cloud necessarily. So when you move from cloud to server, you may tend to lose some data. And in the process of moving cloud to server and then server back to cloud, you may lose some data, some configuration. So that's one of the disadvantages of this approach. The other major disadvantage is that it can be very time consuming. The time it takes to transfer from cloud to server, do all the merging in server and then move it all back to cloud, that can be consuming. And if you imagine that in the process of consolidation, you run into problems, you need to roll back, your downtime just gets worse and worse, right? So there's a lot of risk because of the amount of effort and work that goes into this traditional approach. Next slide, please, Daniel. And so it was a very welcome development when Atlassian introduced the Jira Cloud Migration Assistant. Now, if you're familiar with JCME or if you've ever used it, you would realize how much of a lifesaver it is compared to the traditional approach. It does indeed make things a lot easier. And historically, it didn't support JSM for a long time, but it now actually also supports JSM, which is further good news. Next slide, please, Daniel. Because of JCMA, a more direct migration approach is possible for Jira. Recently, Atlassian also introduced cloud-to-cloud Jira Migration Assistant. So not just server to cloud. So for example, if you, in the example we looked at earlier, in the traditional approach, where you have one cloud site and maybe two DC or server sites to merge, you could use the cloud-to-cloud tool to migrate directly from source cloud to the target cloud site. And then you could use JCMA to move projects from the server or DC instances into cloud. Of course, the cloud-to-cloud migration tool is still in beta, so it has a couple of limitations. For example, no surprise, JSM is still not supported with the cloud-to-cloud migration. Also, if you use, if you're familiar with team-managed projects, which is a cloud feature, team managed projects are not supported yet in the cloud to cloud migration tool. So only company managed projects. But if you were working with a solution partner, for example, the experience we have, we were able to still do a cloud to cloud migration, provided you're not using JSM, even if you're using team managed projects. These are some of the things that we might be able to help you convert and still make a cloud to cloud work, but it is not supported officially. So there are limitations there with that tool being in beta. Yeah, a direct migration approach is now possible. It's a lot less effort compared to the traditional approach. Next slide, please, Daniel. So yeah, the pros, it's quick. And also the JCMA has this has a philosophy of it doesn't it migrates data in such a way that it doesn't modify anything or any existing object in the target instance. This helps to reduce risk. It avoids the risk of accidentally overwriting existing content in the cloud. The advantage of this, obviously, is that if you have a production instance already in cloud and you're moving projects from server or from another cloud into this production instance, you're able to confidently migrate without disrupting what is going on in that existing production projects that you have in the target cloud. Compared to the traditional approach, just a lot less risk. Of course, the cons are, what we talked about, again, configuration drift, which we'll explain in the next slide, and the fact that cloud to cloud does not support JSON. Next slide, please, Daniel. So what is configuration drift or migration drift? So take a scenario where, say, from the 2 source instances that you're migrating to cloud, you have maybe a custom field, for example. The custom field is the environment field, for example. When you run the first migration from the first site to cloud makes a record that this field, this object has been migrated from instance 1. And then if you have to do multiple migrations, maybe you're migrating in batches, the JCMA process is smart enough to say, hey, we already migrated this environment field, so don't re-migrate it unnecessarily. It wouldn't create duplicates every time you migrate. So that's great. But then what if you're in the case of consolidation, when you're migrating from multiple sites into cloud, what could happen is that you have, fields could become duplicated. One, because JCMA, we talked about the JCMA philosophy where it doesn't override any existing objects in the target. So what happens when you're migrating fields with the same name from different sources? What JCMA tries to do to reduce the risk of overwriting data unintentionally is that it creates a second environment field and tags it as migrated. And then if you do subsequent migrations from multiple sites, you may come up with environment migrated 1, migrated 2, migrated 3, multiple duplicates of this field because of this situation. So that's one drawback of the with JCMA when you migrate. This is not just something that affects custom fields. It could affect any object really that you're migrating from server to cloud. So you think about your schemes. If you have schemes with the same name, so whether it's workflows, field configuration, basically any objects could potentially experience configuration drift. So it's something to think about, and it's one of the things that an experienced solution partner like Service Rocket, for example, we have a lot of experience with dealing with these kind of things. We have ways in which we mitigate them in our migration strategy and plan. And so, those are just some of the value that you get from working with a solution partner when you have a complex migration like this. Otherwise, it can be, quite a bit of a mess. If you do not understand these limitations and these quirks of JCMA. All right, next slide, please, Daniel. So we do have other approaches that kind of strike a bit of a better balance with the pros and cons of the previously mentioned two approaches. So in the same scenario, especially in the case, for example, if you had JSM and you cannot do a cloud-to-cloud migration of JSM, for example, you could move from cloud to a bridging instance, like we saw in the traditional approach. However, you could use, and then you could move from cloud to bridging, and then move the other sites directly into the, merge them in bridging. I still use JCMA to move the projects to the cloud. This uses a bit of the processes in both approaches. There's another hybrid approach. Next slide, please, Daniel. And in this case, we're able to do some direct migration, whereas still providing workarounds for limitations with a direct approach, for example, with JSM. So in this example, what we could do is, for all the GSW projects, we could migrate them directly to cloud. For cloud to cloud, using cloud to cloud Jira Migration Assistant, and from server, we could move GSW directly to cloud as well. And then for the GSM projects, we could consolidate them in a bridging DC or server instance, and then use JCMA to migrate server cloud migration assistant now to migrate the GSM projects to cloud. So this allows us to migrate some projects quickly, directly, and reduces the amount of time we spend consolidating on server, because now we're just only concerned with consolidating the JSM projects in server before moving them to cloud. So it just helps, we can save a little bit of time with this hybrid approach when we have to deal with JSM.
Hi, well, we have our first question. In which case would you prefer to use the traditional approach versus direct with JCMA?
Go ahead, Daniel.
Oh, sorry, I wasn't sure if you heard me. In which cases would you prefer to use the traditional approach versus direct with JCMA?
Well, so in every situation where you can use JCMA, it is advantageous to use JCMA. So, for example, especially since JSM is now supported with JCMA from server, in almost every scenario now, it will, if you can use it will be advantageous to use JCMA. It will save you a lot of time, and also would limit risk. I think the only scenario where the traditional approach was, we used that a little bit more often prior to JCMA supporting JSM migration. Only recently, actually, I think, was it probably just earlier this year, JCMA officially supported JSM. So yeah, we had to use the traditional approach a bit, or some hybrid approaches up until then. I hope that answers the question, but feel free to, put something further in the Q&A if I didn't directly answer your question. All right. So some of the things we've talked about, especially with the traditional approach, is similar with Confluence, but let's look at the Confluence strategy. So today, with Confluence, actually the CCMA with Confluence is actually even got mature a lot quicker than JCMA. So you would find that there's very little scenarios where CCMA won't be the best approach to migrate, to consolidate. CCMA just makes things a lot easier. Of course, cloud to cloud for Confluence is not yet available. So if you were merging cloud with server instances, rather than consolidating server instances only, then you will still need to use the traditional space import, space export and import tools to migrate from cloud to cloud. Whereas anything you're moving, your spaces coming from server would go directly to cloud with CCMA. So it is direct, whether you're going from cloud or server, but you can only use CCMA, the migration assistant, from if you're coming from server, if you have spaces coming from server. The space import tools, of course, have limitations. They are based on XML export and import, and will not migrate users and groups. So because of that, we still have some other workarounds for those in the next slide. So if, for example, we were using the same scenario of one cloud and multiple server instances, we could, for the cloud, we could do a full restoration of our cloud site to a bridging server instance or bridging DC instance, and then use CCMA to move that bridging instance to cloud, CCMA also to move the other server instances to cloud. So everything will go to the target cloud using CCMA. This is a good option because this also helps us to migrate the users and groups conveniently from the source cloud. Next slide. We already mentioned that there is the limitation with the space export and import XML tool with migrating users and groups. And you have to, if you were going to use space import, you need to, manually, you could manually export and import users. You could get Atlassian support help with, users. But going through that bridging DC and doing it with CCMA just provides a lot of convenience, actually. All right, next slide.
Really quick, Taiwo, we have another question.
Sure.
We are on server at the moment and thinking of moving to the cloud. We are planning on having multiple instances based on unit and divisions within the organization. We were thinking that it would reduce cost and allow for easier internal billing processes. Can you please comment on this approach?
So if I understand this question, okay, so the question doesn't say whether there are multiple server instances already, or it's not clear to me if this is one server, but they are looking to move into multiple cloud sites, or if this is already multiple server instances moving to.
It is currently single server.
So if you had one single server and you were going to move to cloud, it is very rare that moving into multiple cloud will provide better value. So not to go into the details of the dollars and cents and breaking it down, but you see, like I mentioned earlier, there are some of the value you have from having a consolidated instance that you may not be able to just easily estimate the way you would easily estimate licensing costs, right? Breaking into multiple sites does create additional overhead. It does create some of the problems we talked about where the individual teams do their things their own way. Somebody says, hey, we want this additional functionality, they install a third-party tool. In the other side, they want the same functionality, but because they are separate teams and they have created the silos, they purchase another add-on that is doing the same thing that they already purchased, spent money on the other side. And then before you know it, you duplicate functionality because there are silos. You duplicate licenses, because we're not just talking about the Atlassian licenses, right? We're also talking about third-party licenses when you use third-party apps, marketplace apps. And the more you fragment the site, the more you tend to, duplicate those costs. Not to just talk about the, governance and control, right? So one of the concerns that I've seen people talk about, when we talk about consolidation, customers sometimes worry about, hey, now we're going to have one control, a bunch of guys who are responsible for helping every project, every team configure their Jira, their Confluence properly. But they say, no, that seems like a bottleneck. They would rather give more control to the teams. That, hey, you manage your Jira, you manage your Confluence, each team managing themselves. But actually, if you have a consolidated instance, it's still possible to delegate some of this control. For example, earlier I mentioned about team, for Jira, this is specific to Jira, team managed projects. You could create team managed projects in cloud that give the team, the small teams, a lot of autonomy in creating their workflows, creating fields, creating screens, etc. And they're still able to do a lot of things without needing a Jira admin, like in the company managed projects. So instead of breaking that down into multiple sites, I would first explore something like maybe team managed projects, if it were Jira, right? Explore that first before going into, splitting into the sites. And regarding licensing, this would be a case-by-case basis. Usually that's another thing that solution partners can help with. We can actually help look into, the licensing costs from, what you're paying right now, what you're, what is, look at what you're trying to achieve or with the licensing plan, and try to see if it really, if you're really evaluating it properly, thinking that splitting will actually make things cheaper. Those are some of the things that, we have customer advocates, that, can sit down with you and look into this for you, or also even help you save costs on licensing because of, some of the discounts that, we might be able to get for you. So that's another thing to consider if you're working with a solution partner, especially. All right, I hope I, to some extent, answered that question.
Yes, they said thank you and that it was very helpful. And we have one more question. Would upgrading or having enterprise licenses of Jira Cloud help in consolidating licenses regardless of migrating from DC server or cloud to cloud?
Sorry, if you don't mind, could you just go over that question again? Sorry.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. Would upgrading or having enterprise licenses of Jira Cloud help in consolidating licenses regardless of migrating from DC, Jira Server, or cloud to cloud?
Will upgrading, sorry, one more time.
Yeah. Would upgrading or having enterprise licenses of Jira Cloud help in the consolidating of licenses regardless of migrating from DC, Jira Server, or cloud to cloud?
Yeah, so if you're migrating from different user bases, if you consolidate, your user base is likely to get larger. So if you've had different teams having their own different license and having smaller user tiers. When you consolidate, yes, your user tier will go up. The cost of that individual license will be higher, but then it's one license as opposed to multiple. So, yeah, you may need to increase the user tier for that final consolidated license you have in cloud. But of course, that also comes with additional perks, additional features. Like, for example, if your consolidation means that you move to a premium license tier, then you have even additional features, features that that are maybe only available for premium licenses, or so there is some value in as you go up the licensing tiers. But yes, there is obviously when you consolidate, you may need to go up a tier and pay a little bit more for that single license. But yeah, like I said, those are some of the things that usually our customer advocates are able to look at with you and actually see what gives you the best value in terms of how you consolidate those licenses.
Thank you.
It's a case-by-case thing when it comes to, depends on the kind of licenses you already have, what you're using. You would also, factor in the way that you're built for the third-party app licenses that you're using. All of those things are things we can, that our customer advocates can look at for you and, just basically help you drive more value.
Great. Those are all the questions right now.
All right. So yeah, how we can help. So I already dropped a couple of hints on how an experienced solution partner like Service Rocket can help navigate the maze of consolidation. From licenses to actually the technical strategies for consolidation. But let's summarize in the next slide. So in the initial phase of consolidation, we can assist with numerous conflict analysis. Consolidation is kind of complex. If it hasn't become already obvious, one of the things that happens is you could have configurations in one of the sites that are conflicting with the others. For example, certain objects mean something in site A, but in the other Jira instance, or Jira is usually a good example of this. In the other Jira instance, that configuration means something else. A status means something in one Jira instance, belongs to a specific status category. In the other instance, it means that it's used with a different meaning, belongs to an entirely different category. How do you merge them in a way that is cohesive, doesn't create confusion? All of these things, we do analysis of all the objects, custom fields, schemes, the project configurations, key clicks, risk assessments. We compare the current state of all the source instances with the final consolidated state, and use all of this to pick the most suitable migration strategy based on those initial assessments. Then we draw up, the required plans and runbooks that help to have a successful consolidation. Of course, one of the invaluable things that we do for customers in these consolidations is that we conduct dry runs to validate what the migration strategy that we come up with, and we do end-to-end staging migration and UAT. So we don't just it's not just as simple as clicking buttons and then hoping for the best. But we actually go through, a couple of processes to reduce the risk, and QA, a lot of QA processes as well, to ensure that the consolidated state is free of errors, has good integrity, and that things are cleaned up and look clean at the end of the day. All right. Of course, we handle the actual production migration and even provide post-migration support. After we've done all of this with you over, weeks, months, we tend to get to know your organization and your instances very well. And so beyond the migration, we are able to recommend and even provide consultation and optimizations that you could use to, even clean up your business processes in the consolidated instance even better. We provide consulting on improving governance and even providing further training, as well as long-term support on our managed services offering. So with these consolidations, we've done quite a lot of them, from 2-3 instances, on the smaller scale, to massive consolidations of where you're talking about more than 10 instances being consolidated, especially for very large acquisitions. Of course, we've also dealt with complex scenarios where there's been acquisitions from global teams and entirely different use cases, and trying to consolidate them into one site, but with proper governance to allow teams just the right autonomy for sanity and a good flow and good user experience. So those are some of the the benefits that a next solution partner can bring in to make consolidation less of a headache and actually a fulfilling investment. And I think that's the last slide. So if there are still any questions, happy to take them. Over to you, Danielle.
Thank you. No, it doesn't look like we have any additional questions, but we can give everyone just another moment in case there are any last minute questions that come up. And in the meantime, I just want to thank everyone for joining us today, and thank you, Taiwo, for such an amazing presentation. If you guys do have any questions that pop up, please feel free to reach out to us. You can contact us at sales@servicerocket.com. And otherwise, I hope everyone has a wonderful rest of their day.